The hotel staff told us never to open room 214. We checked into the Larkspur Inn on a Thursday night, 4 hours later than planned thanks to a delayed flight, exhausted and grateful for anything resembling a bed. It was the kind of place you book because it's cheap and has decent reviews and is walking distance from where you actually want to be. A converted 3-story building from the 1930s, all creaky hardwood and radiator heat. More charming than it had any right to be at that price point. The front desk clerk, a young guy who looked barely old enough to be working the night shift alone, handed us our key card along with a small, oddly specific instruction that I almost laughed off as some kind of running joke among the staff. "You're in 216, he said, which is great, no complaints there. Just, whatever you do, don't open the door to 214. Not even to look in. If housekeeping's card is outside it, don't touch it, don't peek past it, just walk on by." My husband Ryan asked, half joking, if it was haunted. The clerk didn't laugh. He just said, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't the first time he'd had to say it, "I'm not really supposed to get into it. Corporate doesn't love us talking about it. Just, please. It's not a big deal as long as nobody opens it." We should have left it there. Instead, lying in bed that first night, unable to sleep off the jet lag, Ryan pulled up the hotel on his phone and started digging through reviews, looking for any mention of room 214. Most guests, unsurprisingly, said nothing about it at all. You don't tend to notice a closed or 2 rooms down unless something draws your attention to it. But buried in a review from 8 months earlier, one guest had written, in the rambling, slightly unhinged way people write reviews at 2 a.m., "Don't ask about 214. We asked. We shouldn't have asked. Front desk gave us a full refund just to stop asking, and I still don't know what we almost saw." Another review, older, simply said, "That room isn't for rent for a reason. Respect it." We laughed about it. Mostly, the nervous kind of laughing you do when something's genuinely gotten under your skin and you're trying to talk yourselves out of taking it seriously. We fell asleep eventually, and the first night passed without incident. No strange sounds, nothing through the walls, nothing but the ordinary creaks of an old building settling around us. The next morning, heading down for breakfast, I noticed the door to 214 for the first time in daylight. It looked exactly like every other door on the floor. Same brass numbers, same paint, same peephole. Except the peephole, I noticed on my way past, had been filled in from the inside with something dark, so that instead of the small glass circle every other door had, 214's was just a smooth, matte black disc. I mentioned it to Ryan, and neither of us said much else about it that day, though I noticed both of us, without discussing it, taking the stairs instead of walking that stretch of hallway more than we strictly needed to. It was our second night that things changed. We'd gone out for dinner, come back a little after 11, and as we walked down the hallway toward our room, I heard something from behind 214's door. Faint, but unmistakably a sound of movement. Not footsteps exactly, more like something being dragged slowly across a hardwood floor, a slow scraping rhythm that paused every few seconds before starting again. We stopped walking. We stood there, I think, for almost a full minute, neither of us saying anything, both of us staring at that door with its filled-in peephole, listening to that scraping sound continue, unhurried, patient, from a room the front desk had told us, on our very first night, was not to be opened. Ryan, to his credit, wanted to just go to our room and forget it. I was the one who couldn't let it go. Some combination of exhaustion and stubbornness convincing me that this was clearly some prank, some elaborate hotel gimmick, maybe even a genuinely haunted room marketing angle dressed up as a serious warning to make guests feel like they'd stumbled onto something authentic. I want to be honest that what happened next is entirely my fault. I knocked on the door, just once, lightly, more out of morbid curiosity than any real expectation of an answer. The scraping sound stopped immediately. For a long moment there was nothing, no sound at all, not even the ordinary ambient hum of an old building. And then, from directly behind the door, close enough that I felt Ryan physically pull me back a step, came a voice. Low, male, I think, though it had an odd, flattened quality to it, like a recording played back slightly wrong. It said a single word, clearly, deliberately, through the door. Careful. We didn't wait to hear anything else. We went straight to our room, locked the door, and I called the front desk immediately, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. The same young clerk from our first night answered, and when I told him what happened, his tone shifted immediately from casual to something much more careful, much more rehearsed. "You didn't open it, right?" he asked, first thing, before I'd even finished explaining. "You didn't touch the handle." I told him no, we hadn't. We'd just knocked and heard a voice, and he exhaled audibly, relieved in a way that did nothing to reassure me. Okay, good. As long as the door stayed shut, you're fine. It only matters if it actually opens." He paused, and then, in a lower voice, added something he probably wasn't supposed to say. "It's not really a hotel room anymore. Hasn't been for years. We can't get rid of it. Believe me, corporates tried. Contractors won't finish the job once they've been inside it more than once. So we just keep it locked, keep the peephole covered so nobody can look in and get curious, and we tell every guest near it not to open it. Most people don't. You'd be surprised how many people just listen." I asked him what would happen if someone did open it. He was quiet for a long moment before answering, and when he did, his voice had gone flat, reciting something rather than explaining it. 2 years ago, a guest opened it. We don't really talk about what happened to him. He checked out that same night. We have him on camera doing it, walking right out the front doors around 4 a.m. Except his family filed a missing persons report a week later. Nobody's heard from him since. The room was completely empty when we finally got someone brave enough to check it the next morning. No sign anyone had even been in it. Not since, well, not for a long time before that. We checked out early the next morning, a full day ahead of our booking, and the front desk didn't charge us for the missed night. Nobody asked why we were leaving. I got the sense they never do. I looked the hotel up again a few months later, that same nervous curiosity pulling me back despite myself, and found that room 214 still doesn't appear in their online booking system. Hasn't for years, permanently excluded from the available inventory with no public explanation given. I also found, buried in a local news archive, a brief item from over a decade ago about a guest who'd gone missing from that same hotel under circumstances the article described only as unresolved, with a request for anyone with information to come forward. Nobody, as far as I can tell, ever did. I think about that scraping sound sometimes, the slow, patient rhythm of it, and the word that voice said through the door. Not a threat, not a warning to leave, just that single word, careful, spoken with something that almost sounded like genuine concern. I've never been able to decide if that makes it better or so much worse. Someone knocked on our door every hour without speaking. It started on our second night in the new apartment, a modest one-bedroom on the third floor of an older building, the kind of place with thin walls and a landlord who answers maintenance requests about once a decade. My partner Joe and I had just finished unpacking the last of the boxes when, right around 10 p.m., someone knocked on our front door. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, ordinary enough. I answered it expecting a neighbor, maybe someone welcoming us or complaining about noise from the moving process. The hallway was empty. I checked both directions, assumed it was kids messing around, and went back inside. At 11 p.m., it happened again. Same 3 knocks. I answered again, a little more annoyed this time, and again found nothing. An empty hallway, no footsteps receding, no sound of anyone at all. By the third occurrence, at midnight, Joe and I had stopped answering and had started, instead, just watching the door from the couch, waiting for the knock we both knew was coming. It came right on schedule. 3 knocks. Nobody visible through the peephole. No one there when we finally worked up the nerve to open it anyway. This continued through the night. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., always exactly on the hour, always 3 knocks, never a voice, never a note left, never any sign of anyone at all when we checked. We didn't sleep that first full night. By morning we were exhausted, jumpy, and half convinced we'd imagined at least some of it out of moving day stress and unfamiliar surroundings. We installed a small camera aimed at the hallway outside our door the next day, the kind that clips over a peephole and streams to a phone app. That night, The knocking resumed on schedule, and this time we had proof it wasn't our imagination, except the camera showed exactly what our own eyes had shown us. An empty hallway, no one approaching, no one knocking, and yet on the audio track, faint but unmistakable, 3 knocks against our door at precisely the top of every hour. We asked around the building, cautiously, trying not to sound as unhinged as we felt. Most neighbors had nothing to offer beyond polite confusion. But one, an older woman 2 doors down named Estelle, who'd lived in the building for almost 20 years, got very quiet when we described it, and eventually admitted that the apartment we'd moved into had a bit of a reputation among long-time residents, though she was clearly reluctant to elaborate. Pressed gently, she told us that the previous long-term tenant, a man who'd lived there for almost a decade, had died in the apartment, alone, undiscovered for nearly 4 days. A heart condition nobody had known was serious enough to be fatal. What made her uncomfortable, she said, wasn't the death itself, which happens in old buildings more often than people like to think about. It was the detail that had circulated through the building afterward, from the paramedics who'd eventually been called, that neighbors had reported in the days before his body was found, hearing knocking from his apartment at regular hourly intervals throughout each night, knocking that had continued, according to at least 2 separate accounts, even after his body was confirmed to have already been there, unmoving, for well over 24 hours by that point. Nobody ever explained that, Estelle told us, arms crossed, clearly wishing she hadn't started this conversation. Building manager just said pipes, wind, whatever gets people to stop asking. But it started up again with the last 2 tenants after him too. Both of them moved out within a couple months. Both of them wouldn't say exactly why when I asked. Joe wanted to move out immediately. I understood the impulse, but, stubborn in a way I've since had cause to regret, wanted to at least try to understand what we were dealing with first, some combination of curiosity and a genuine unwillingness to lose our security deposit, and the non-refundable moving costs would only just finish paying off. We tried, over the following week, everything reasonable. White noise machines, which did nothing to mask the knocking no matter how loud we ran them. A different camera angle, catching the door itself rather than the hallway, which showed the door's surface actually flexing slightly inward with each knock, a tiny but visible give in the wood, even though nothing was ever visible touching it. We even tried, on one particularly exhausted night, opening the door the instant before the hour struck, standing right there with the door already open, watching the empty hallway in real time as the knock sounded anyway, from the inside face of the door, the side facing us, the side that should have been physically impossible to knock on from an empty hallway with the door standing wide open. That was the night we stopped trying to understand it and started, instead, trying to leave. We found, through the same slow process of asking around and digging through what public records we could access, that the man who died in the apartment had a habit, according to Estelle and one other longtime resident, of checking on his elderly mother by phone every single hour throughout the night in the months before his death, worried about her declining health, unable to sleep properly for the anxiety of it. He would call her, listen for her to answer, and if she didn't pick up within a few rings, he would apparently get in his car regardless of the hour and drive the 20 minutes to her house to check on her in person. His mother, it turned out, had died herself only 6 weeks before he did, a fact none of our neighbors seemed to know or think relevant, buried in an old obituary I found through an unrelated search, which meant that for the final 6 weeks of his own life, he would have still been making those hourly calls, out of habit or grief or something that hadn't caught up yet with what had actually happened, calling a number that could never again answer. We moved out at the end of that month, eating the cost, telling the landlord some version of the truth that he received with the tired, unsurprised expression of a man who'd heard some version of this story several times before and had simply decided it wasn't his problem to solve. We live somewhere else now, a newer building, thinner history, nothing knocking on our door but actual delivery drivers and the occasional neighbor. Except once, about 4 months after we moved, at exactly 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of 3 knocks, faint, and lay there for a long time afterward, waiting to see if it would happen again on the hour. It didn't. Not that night, and not since. But I still check the clock sometimes, out of habit, whenever I wake in the dark for no clear reason. and some nights I find myself hoping it really was nothing, and other nights, in a way I don't fully understand, I find myself almost missing it, wondering if somewhere, still, someone is calling a number that will never pick up, checking on someone who can no longer answer, every hour, on the hour, for as long as habits like that apparently manage to outlast the people who formed them. We heard furniture moving in the empty room above us. Our apartment was on the 4th floor of a converted textile mill, exposed brick and tall windows, the kind of place that photographs beautifully and has just enough quirks, uneven floors, a radiator that clanks like it's trying to communicate, to remind you it wasn't actually built to be lived in. We loved it anyway. My wife Naomi and I had been there almost 2 years when the sound started. It began with what we assumed, reasonably, was new upstairs neighbors. Scraping, dragging sounds directly above our bedroom. Late at night, the unmistakable noise of furniture being moved across hardwood, heavy pieces by the sound of it, dresses or bookshelves being dragged rather than lifted. It happened most nights for about 2 weeks, usually starting around midnight and continuing off and on until nearly dawn. I finally went up to introduce myself and gently ask if they could maybe move furniture at a slightly more reasonable hour. The unit directly above ours had a for rent sign taped to the door. I checked with the building's leasing office the next day, assuming maybe I had the wrong floor or the sign was outdated. They confirmed it. Unit 507, directly above our 407, had been vacant for going on 4 months, ever since the previous tenant had broken his lease unexpectedly and moved out with almost no notice. I mentioned the sounds. The leasing agent, a woman who'd clearly had this exact conversation before, gave a tight, professional smile and told me that older buildings settle, that sound travels strangely through original hardwood and old plaster, that it was probably coming from a different unit entirely and simply carrying at an angle that made it seem like it was coming from directly above us. Naomi and I wanted to believe that. We really did. But the sounds continued, and they were specific in a way that got harder to explain away the longer we listened. Not random creaks and settling, but distinct, purposeful movement. A dragging sound that would go from one side of the room to the other, pause, and then repeat. Occasionally what sounded unmistakably like a chair being pulled out from a table and then, sometime later, pushed back in. We started keeping a log, almost as a coping mechanism, noting the time and rough duration of each occurrence. A pattern emerged that neither of us liked once we saw it laid out. The sounds always started between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, always lasted roughly 90 minutes, and always ended with a final, heavier sound, something large being dragged and then set down hard enough that our own ceiling fixture would rattle faintly in response. We asked the leasing office if we could see inside 507, some combination of curiosity and a need to prove to ourselves there was a reasonable explanation waiting behind that door. They initially refused, citing liability, but after 2 more weeks of complaints, from us and, we learned, from the tenants in 607 above that unit as well, who'd apparently been hearing similar sounds coming from below them, the building manager agreed to let us look, mostly, I suspect, to make the complaint stop. The unit was completely empty. Bare hardwood floors, freshly painted walls, not a single piece of furniture, not even the built-in fixtures you'd expect a landlord to leave for a new tenant. It had clearly been sitting vacant exactly as long as they claimed. The building manager, a practical man in his 50s who didn't strike me as someone prone to superstition, got quiet while we stood there, looking around the empty space with an expression I couldn't quite place. Eventually, unprompted, he told us something he said he generally tried not to mention to tenants. The previous occupant of 507, an elderly man who'd lived there for almost 15 years, had suffered from a progressive cognitive decline in his final year in the apartment. According to family members the manager had dealt with directly during the messy process of the lease break. Near the end, apparently, the man had developed a nightly ritual, likely connected to the confusion of his condition, rearranging his furniture obsessively every single night, convinced each time that something wasn't quite right about the room, dragging dresses and chairs and tables into new configurations that made sense only to him. sometimes for hours, before finally, exhausted, allowing himself to sleep. His family had eventually moved him into a cave facility once it became clear he could no longer safely live alone, and the apartment had been cleared out entirely, professionally, every trace of him removed within a single week. None of the actual furniture from those nightly rearrangements ever making it back into the building. He had died, the manager told us, quietly, in that cave facility, almost exactly 4 months ago. The same 4 months, give or take, that the apartment above us had supposedly stood completely empty. We moved a few months later, not entirely because of the sounds. Our lease was up anyway, and we'd been considering a change regardless. But I won't pretend the timing was a coincidence. The last night we were in the apartment, packing the final boxes well past midnight, the sound started again right on schedule. That same familiar dragging rhythm from directly above us. And for the first time in the entire ordeal, Naomi and I didn't feel afraid so much as strangely, unexpectedly sad, standing there listening to what sounded, more than anything else, like someone trying, night after night, in a room that no longer held anything at all, to finally get something arranged the way it was supposed to be. I don't know if that's a comforting way to think about it or much worse one. I go back and forth, but I know that on our very last night there, right as that final heavy sound came, the dragging, the pause, the settling thud that always marked the end of it, the ceiling fixture above our heads rattled once, gently, the way it always had. And then, for the first time in months, everything upstairs went completely, permanently quiet.